Imagine you are a Romanian air defense commander. You are staring at a radar console, and you have maybe 4 minutes to decide whether to shoot down an incoming Russian drone.
That is an incredibly tight window to make a call like that.
It really is. But there is a massive catch here. Pulling that trigger to protect your own citizens means firing an interceptor missile directly into a neighboring country's sovereign airspace. So what do you do in that situation?
I mean, it is the ultimate modern military dilemma.
Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief, available at claireandhoratio.com. It is a privilege to have you with us today. Our mission for this briefing is straightforward. We are going to cover the most critical global stories crossing the wire, unpack the mechanisms of how these events actually unfold, explain why they matter to you, and, clearly identify the elements that remain uncertain.
Because today's stories really require us to carefully separate complex claims from hard facts. We are looking at a global landscape where rigid, entrenched systems are being challenged.
Which means everything from international borders and diplomatic protocols to centuries-old cultural traditions are facing unprecedented technological and social disruptions.
And we are seeing that friction play out in real time across multiple continents.
On the agenda for you today, we have high-stakes nuclear diplomacy stalling out in the White House Situation Room, AI-enabled drones radically altering the geometry of the war in Ukraine, an explosive international accountability report from the United Nations, and a look at shifting cultural landscapes in South Korea and India.
The tension in our first story involves a very delicate two-front geopolitical balancing act. The United States is currently attempting to manage a volatile crisis with Iran while simultaneously trying to project deliberate strength to its allies in the Asia-Pacific region.
Okay, let us start with the situation in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump recently convened top aides in the White House Situation Room. The goal was to make a final determination on a framework for extending a 60-day ceasefire with Iran.
And before the meeting even began, he laid out his demands on social media. These are his stated red lines. He insisted that Iran must agree to never possess a nuclear weapon, and that the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened for unrestricted shipping in both directions.
He also demanded that all mines in the strait be cleared immediately. The leverage the U.S. is offering here is the lifting of its current naval blockade. If Iran complies, Trump stated he is prepared to lift that blockade, which would allow commercial ships trapped in the waterway to head home.
But the demands go quite a bit further. The U.S. is also demanding that Iran allow American forces to remove and physically destroy its stockpiles of enriched uranium. And they noted that no financial compensation would be exchanged until further notice.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why specifically a 60-day window? And more importantly, how do you enforce the physical destruction of enriched uranium without putting boots on the ground inside hostile territory? I mean, that sounds like a logistical impossibility.
Well, the 60-day window is actually a standard diplomatic time frame. It is often used for International Atomic Energy Agency verifications. It provides just enough runway to set up inspection protocols without committing to a permanent treaty.
So it is essentially a probationary period to get inspectors in the door.
Precisely.
Right.
But as for enforcing the destruction of uranium, that is the core point of friction. Without direct military occupation, enforcement relies entirely on Iran voluntarily handing over the material to a third party.
Which historically they have fiercely resisted doing without massive sanctions relief in return.
They have. Furthermore, the stakes regarding the Strait of Hormuz are astronomical. In normal times, roughly 20% of the world's energy supplies ship through that narrow corridor. The current blockade has severely constrained global oil supplies, sending prices soaring.
And Iran's pushback to these demands was immediate and severe. Mohsen Rezai, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader, accused the U.S. president of betraying diplomacy for a third time, calling the demands excessive.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesman also reiterated that they are focused purely on ending the war. They insist their nuclear program is entirely peaceful and strictly non-negotiable.
So the uncertainty really lies in the stark contrast between the diplomatic messaging coming from both sides. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance claimed negotiators are, quote, very close and just going back and forth on a couple of language points regarding enrichment levels.
Meanwhile, Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Baker Kalibaf, publicly stated they have no trust in guarantees or words, only actions. And while these negotiations stall, the reality on the ground is deteriorating rapidly.
Both sides are accusing the other of violating the fragile ceasefire. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps targeted a U.S. airbase in Kuwait, claiming it was the source of earlier American strikes on an Iranian port city.
And U.S. Central Command immediately labeled the attack on Kuwait an egregious ceasefire violation.
So we have a situation where the diplomatic talks are completely disconnected from the kinetic reality on the ground.
The tension here lies in resource allocation, which brings us to the second front of this balancing act. At the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sought to reassure Asia-Pacific allies that the United States is not turning its back on them.
For context, the Shangri-La Dialogue is essentially Asia's premier defense summit, where military leaders from across the globe size each other up. So Hegseth is insisting the U.S. can fulfill its global obligations regarding Iran while simultaneously maintaining power projection in the Pacific.
He is. But a participant directly questioned Hegseth about the U.S. suspending a $14 billion weapons package to Taiwan. The U.S. did that specifically to conserve those munitions for the potential conflict with Iran.
Okay, let's unpack this again. How does the U.S. project deliberate strength in Asia while literally withholding weapons from its partners?
Hegseth attempted to decouple those two issues. He insisted the overall U.S. munitions stockpile is in a very strong position, but his broader message was a demand for more combat power and less empty globalist rhetoric.
He called for Asian allies to drastically increase their defense spending to 3.5% of their gross domestic product, which is a massive jump.
It is a huge financial ask. He also specifically labeled New Zealand a freeloader.
A categorization New Zealand's defense minister firmly denied. They noted they are currently increasing their investment to 2% of their GDP. It is a very precarious diplomatic wire to walk, demanding heavier investments from allies while actively diverting promised resources to another theater of war.
Moving to the literal battlefield, we are seeing the consequences of modern warfare spilling over rigid national borders in real time.
We saw this in the eastern Romanian town of Galați, which is near the Ukrainian border. A Russian Garan 2 drone, also known as a Shahid 136, detonated on the 10th floor of a residential building.
2 people required hospital treatment, and 70 were evacuated. While drones have strayed into Romania before during this 4-year war, this is the first time Romanian civilians have actually been injured.
To understand the gravity of this, we need to look at what a Shahid 136 actually is. It is not some high-tech, supersonic stealth craft.
Not at all. It is a slow, cheap, explosive-laden loitering munition. It literally sounds like a flying moped. The constraints on the Romanian military highlight the severe rigidity of international borders during a modern conflict.
Brigadier General Gerge Maxim reported that the Army only had a 4-minute window to react from the moment the drone was detected crossing the border.
And the critical point here is that Romanian forces were unable to fire on the drone earlier because they cannot launch interceptor munitions that violate Ukrainian airspace.
Because Romania is at peace and Ukraine is at war, the rules of engagement are painfully binary, but the airborne threat is completely fluid.
The international condemnation was swift. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated the alliance stands ready to defend every inch of Allied territory.
And the European Union's Ursula von der Leyen declared Russia had crossed yet another line. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed he had just heard of the incident and suggested the wreckage be handed over for an objective investigation.
He was openly questioning whether the drone was even Russian. What's fascinating here is the paradigm shift in tactics. Russia relies on overwhelming mass and border incursions, which occasionally bleed into NATO territory.
While Ukraine is radically altering the geometry of the battlefield through rapid technological adaptation, they are using a strategy called a logistics lockdown.
Using AI-enabled Hornet drones, guided by jamming-resistant Starlink networks, Ukrainian forces are striking Russian fuel, food, and ammunition convoys up to 100 miles behind the front lines.
The mechanics of this are vital to understand. Russian electronic warfare is highly effective at jamming traditional radio signals, so Ukraine is using optical AI targeting to counter it.
Once the drone operator identifies a target truck, they lock the AI onto the visual profile of that vehicle. Even if the Russian jammers cut the radio link between the pilot and the drone, the onboard AI takes over.
It just flies the drone the final mile to impact autonomously. And Starlink's use of phased array antennas and rapid frequency hopping makes the overall communication network incredibly difficult for Russia to blind in the first place.
It creates a massive vulnerability for Russian supply lines.
It is like trying to starve a giant by cutting its capillaries instead of its main arteries. They are not trying to blow up the heavily fortified Russian frontline base. They are taking out the grocery delivery guy on a dirt road 100 miles away.
Open-source analysts have actually confirmed the destruction of at least 150 vehicles along critical routes connecting Russia to Crimea and other occupied territories.
But wait, Can a logistics lockdown actually win a war of attrition? Because 100 destroyed trucks sounds like a lot, but Russia has an entire military-industrial complex backing it. Aren't we just talking about a Band-Aid on a bullet wound here?
It is a fair critique. I mean, 100 trucks will not collapse the Russian military infrastructure overnight. The strategy is entirely about operational tempo.
Meaning they are trying to slow down the rate at which Russia can conduct offensive operations?
Correct. Some Russian brigades require up to 1,000 tons of supplies every single day just to function. By severing that final mile delivery, Ukraine is neutralizing Russia's advantage in sheer manpower.
The 412th Nemesis Brigade, which is a specialist Ukrainian drone unit, noted that Russian commanders are so restricted they are attempting to move heavy equipment through fields and dirt roads just to evade detection.
The lingering uncertainty is time. Military analysts note that Russia will eventually develop optical countermeasures or more advanced localized jamming.
Meaning Ukraine has a rare temporary window to exploit this drone superiority before the technological gap closes again.
The blurring of physical borders in warfare often mirrors the blurring of legal and moral lines, which brings up a critical point regarding global accountability.
Before we get into that, a quick reminder for you. If you want to explore the daily news with a free-thinking approach or just fall down some fascinating brain candy rabbit holes, head over to claironhoratio.com. It is also a great home for classic audiobooks.
The UN report we are looking at next is incredibly heavy, but it is essential to look at the facts as they are presented.
Yes, the United Nations Secretary General has officially added Israel and Russia to a blacklist of countries committing sexual violence in war zones. It is crucial we state the parameters of this report plainly, based solely on the UN's published findings.
The report, covering last year, states the UN verified 31 cases of sexual violence perpetrated by Israeli forces against Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank.
The reported violations included rape, forced nudity, and violence to genitals, allegedly committed by officers from the military, police, and prison service.
Oh.
The UN claims their investigations were obstructed by the Israeli government.
The Israeli government's pushback has been absolute and severe. Israel formally rejects all allegations of sexual abuse. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, accused the Secretary General of spreading anti-Semitic lies.
And the Israeli mission announced it will refuse all further contact with his office. In response to a New York Times report on the issue, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar announced a defamation lawsuit against the newspaper.
They called the report a hideous and distorted lie. The Israeli military has stated it conducts examinations and criminal investigations into exceptional incidents in accordance with Israeli and international law.
For full context regarding the UN's reporting, Hamas was added to this same blacklist last year, citing allegations of sexual violence against hostages.
The UN noted they were unable to fully verify those specific allegations at the time due to lack of access.
The UN report also blacklisted Russian armed forces for the first time. The United Nations identified 310 instances of conflict-related sexual violence against prisoners of war and civilian detainees in Russia and Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine.
As of now, Russia has not publicly commented on these specific UN findings.
We shift now from international oversight to a domestic accountability story playing out in South Africa that feels entirely surreal.
It really does. The Madlanga Commission is currently investigating deep-seated police corruption, and the details emerging from the public hearings are staggering.
The inquiry stems from allegations that organized crime groups have deeply infiltrated the South African police and government. It is like watching the plot armor of corrupt officials in a serialized crime drama finally wear off.
The hearings have exposed a level of brazenness that reveals how systemic rot actually functions when it hides in plain sight. For instance, a senior police officer, Brigadier Rachel Met Jang, was questioned about a health services tender awarded to a controversial businessman known as Kat Metlala.
She vehemently denied receiving kickbacks for the contract, and her defense during the official inquiry was wild. She claimed the businessman was simply her boyfriend, and the only gift she ever asked him for was the weight loss drug Ozempic.
She explicitly denied internet rumors that he funded a Brazilian butt lift for her.
While that detail obviously grabs the headlines, the core mechanism of the corruption involves massive logistical failures regarding confiscated narcotics. In one instance, 541 kilograms of cocaine worth over $12 million were stolen from a poorly secured police building.
Investigators believe it was a highly coordinated inside job. Then, a month later, 700 kilograms of cocaine were seized in a botched raid led by Maruma Magain.
And McGain is an office-bound analytics officer with zero experience in tactical drug busts. He was acting completely outside his jurisdiction alongside a traffic officer.
They entered a logistics company without a warrant, loaded the drugs onto a police vehicle, and later admitted to tampering with evidence.
We have to look at how internal chain of custody protocols are deliberately bypassed. You assign inexperienced office-bound officers to major busts across jurisdictional lines.
That way, when 136 kilograms of that specific cocaine haul mysteriously vanishes from a forensic science laboratory later on, it looks like administrative incompetence rather than criminal malice.
Because incompetence might get you fired, but malice gets you a prison sentence. During the inquiry, the lead commissioner put it directly to McGain that he was clueless, and knew he was clueless.
And McGain simply replied, "That is correct, Commissioner."
How does systemic rot become so blatant that it operates openly like that?
Systemic rot becomes visible when the internal mechanisms of oversight degrade to the point where bad actors no longer fear consequence. They operate openly because the system designed to catch them has been co-opted to protect them. The friction of getting caught has been entirely removed.
That concept actually feeds perfectly into the underlying current of today's briefing. We are looking at the profound friction created when modern realities collide with entrenched traditions.
And for those of you who want to explore the historical precedents of how cultural shifts like this happen, I highly recommend checking out the Brain Candy section on claireandhoratio.com. It provides some excellent historical context.
We are looking at two very different cultural shifts today regarding that friction. One is stepping into the light, and another is fading into history. In South Korea, the Supreme Court has officially overturned a 1992 ruling that defined tattooing strictly as a medical act.
For 34 years, only licensed doctors could legally ink tattoos. Breaking the law meant heavy fines or even jail time.
Which essentially forced an entire industry underground. The original law was ostensibly about public hygiene, but the mechanism behind it heavily reinforced conservative social norms.
Norms that associated body art with organized crime and delinquency. Tattoo artists faced constant vulnerability. They dealt with blackmail from disgruntled clients and harassment from authorities.
Because reporting crimes against themselves to the police meant admitting to practicing an illegal profession.
Despite the ban, South Korean fine line tattooing became a massive global phenomenon over the last decade. Celebrities, K-pop stars, and Hollywood actors were actively seeking out Korean artists.
Finally, after a sustained campaign by the tattoo union, the law broke. Last week, over 90 artists gathered openly on a rooftop in Seoul for an event called Ink Bomb.
They were celebrating their legitimacy without fear of police raids. The synthesis here is clear. Global recognition and shifting youth culture simply overpowered an outdated legal standard.
But in Mumbai, India, we are seeing modernity dismantle a legendary 130-year-old tradition. We're talking about the Dabbawalas.
For over a century, these delivery workers, identifiable by their traditional white caps, have navigated Mumbai's intense railway and street networks to deliver hot, home-cooked lunches to office workers.
At its peak, nearly 4,500 Dabbawalas were delivering 50,000 lunchboxes daily. They utilized a complex, low-tech alphanumeric code system painted on the lids of the metal tins, passed down through generations.
There were no smartphone apps, no GPS routing. It was a logistical marvel so precise that Harvard Business School dedicated extensive research to understanding its efficiency.
Then the pandemic hit, and remote work became the norm. Even as offices reopened, hybrid schedules remained.
Simultaneously, the digital gig economy exploded across India. Apps like Swiggy and Zomato offered instant, highly varied restaurant meals delivered directly to a desk.
The Dabbawalas, who charge around $21 a month for a daily home-cooked delivery, simply could not compete with the sheer convenience of the smartphone era. The numbers reflect a stark reality. The workforce has plummeted from 4,500 to roughly 1,500.
Workers who once delivered to 20 clients a day now have 2 or 3. Many have abandoned the trade entirely to become tuk-tuk drivers.
Those who remain are forced into double shifts, taking on secondary jobs just to survive in an increasingly expensive city. The common denominator in both of these cultural stories is friction reduction.
In Mumbai, digital apps reduce the friction of acquiring food better than the traditional Dabbawalas could. In Seoul, digital globalization reduced the social friction of getting a tattoo, forcing an archaic law to adapt.
Because technology does not inherently care about tradition. It only cares about finding the path of least resistance.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to ponder as we conclude today's briefing. Consider the structures and systems operating in your own life. What long-held traditions are quietly fading into the background, outcompeted by modern convenience? And conversely, what underground ideas or suppressed practices are gathering enough cultural momentum that they are just about to step into the light?
Thank you for joining us for the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief. We invite you to visit claireandhoratio.com to explore more daily briefings, fall down our brain candy rabbit holes, or simply unwind with our classic audiobooks. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.